Lovely for you guys to join us. Both of you have had careers in both industry and academia, as have I. I think we've probably all started off from a relatively mechanical background as well. So hopefully this evening people will be able to hear a bit about that and draw some comparisons with their own careers too. And we'll be able to talk a bit about what we've got in common and where the differences are as well. So would anyone like to go first about introducing a bit about their career journey? You know, where have you come from? Where are you now? Otherwise, I will lead by example.
I think that is Rich offering me the microphone in a virtual way. Yeah, so Chloe did ask me to reflect on my career before I came, and specifically thinking about this journey to fellowship, I suppose. So I became a fellow of the IMechE in 2019 with the great help of Richard Lincoln, who is sat here, who reviewed my application and was an external referee for it. So what happened? What did I do leading up to that? So I did a PhD, which I think is not necessarily helpful for becoming a future fellow of the IMechE. So I did a PhD straight after university, and that's when I started to get involved with the IMechE, actually. So I was in the final of their PhD of the Year competition, and gave a talk at that. And sometimes when you're thinking about how your career's developed, you don't notice that you have these critical moments that later on you realise were actually quite formative. So I did not win that competition, which is not unusual for me, but I was the runner-up. And they said to me in the feedback, oh, you know, we thought your PhD just sounded really easy. So either you're just really good at explaining things or your PhD was really easy. And then somebody else had given me the feedback, oh, it was the best lecture we'd seen ever from a PhD student. So I kind of formed this opinion that actually what they were telling me was that I'd made it sound too simple by potentially being quite good at teaching or lecturing. So I know that I've kind of held on to that going forwards. So I then went and worked in industry. I went to Jaguar Land Rover and decided not to go in there as an experienced hire, which is one route that Jaguar Land Rover employs people, but to go onto the graduate scheme because I received some very good advice that I wanted to get a good view around the business. And that meant that not only did I take on engineering roles, but they let me take on, I went into manufacturing, I went into marketing. I got to work for what they called the internal consultancy unit when it was just starting. And then when I chose my home, I ended up looking after a team that was doing mathematical modelling capability improvement. So looking at the kind of models that were being used across the business and trying to improve those, especially looking at how we embed models of people into those vehicles to understand the impact that the vehicle was having on the person. So that was at the time that I was applying to be a CEng. So I just got back from maternity leave, actually, and was applying to be a chartered engineer. And I remember thinking I'm going to have to wait until I've managed some budgets to apply for chartered engineer, because although I was doing the MPDS, so for the IMechE, there's this kind of structured way of writing quarterly reports and reflecting on things, and I was very good at submitting those on time. I had not yet managed a budget, right? So I remember as soon as I got this role where I was leading this team thinking, well, I can categorically say exactly how much money in simulation time I've saved or exactly how much money in testing time I've saved. So I'm going to call that managing a budget. And I wrote my application and it came through very quickly, had my interview with them, and that was all very good. So after that, I kind of spent another year working there. And then as part of that, I was doing lots of work with WMG on kind of curriculum. So we used to get kind of managers from Jaguar Land Rover helping to develop curriculum at WMG and at other universities. And I was running a big program for simulation, EPSERC funded project. And kind of kept coming back to whenever I did talks, whenever I did graduate talks or careers talks or outreach talks, or looked at what was going on in education, I kept coming back to that idea, well, maybe I'm a teacher, maybe that's what I'm interested in. And ended up taking this job at Warwick, which was where they hired people from industry specifically to come and support development of curriculum. And I do remember thinking at the time, oh, this is going to be a compromise, because if I want to become a fellow of the IMechE, how will I do that if I'm not doing something senior in industry? And I actually didn't really understand academic careers, so I didn't know, I was coming in, what were we called, Rich? Principal Teaching Fellow, which I didn't know what that meant. So I didn't know that I was coming into actually quite a senior role as it was. And I was just thinking, oh, well, it's a decision I'm making. I'm going to be a CEng, and carried on. And then it was only maybe 4 years after that, through kind of knowing Rich, and having then got senior fellowship at the HEA, I read a document where they compared professional development of academics. So senior fellowship at the HEA, for example, to fellowship criteria of the IMechE. So in 2019, I decided to apply and to kind of put what I'd done down. And the main thing I really talked about was influence. So that's how I tried to, instead of talking about seniority and management, I tried to talk a lot about influence. I was still doing lots of conference talks. I was still kind of doing strategic activities, lots of CPD, which I think is one of the most useful things that you can be doing in terms of getting fellowship. And then I applied and fully expected to need to be interviewed. So the IMechE do this process where if they're not quite sure, they interview you. But again, kind of quite quickly got the paper-based route back saying that that was successful. So that was 2019. And I think that's probably as far as I need to go in my route to fellowship.
Yeah, we can always talk more about what happened next afterwards. I will clarify for those who are listening who don't know what FHEA or SFHEA is.
Oh, sorry, yeah.
The three of us are academics, but HEA is the Higher Education Academy. So having your fellowship or your senior fellowship of that is similar to having your chartership as an engineer. So like being a chartered engineer, it's the sort of equivalent of being a chartered lecturer.